On today's episode, I'm talking with Kaitlin Curtice, and we get to have a little bit of a laugh about growing up very evangelical. And we also expand our conversation to talking about the incredible healing that is possible when we shed some of these labels that we might have been given that no longer serve us. But I don't want to spoil too much, so I'll just get into introducing Kaitlin. Kaitlin Curtice is an award-winning author, poet, storyteller, and public speaker. As an enrolled citizen of the Potawatomi Nation, Kaitlin writes on the intersections of spirituality and identity and how those things shift throughout our lives. She's written many books, of which I have read. This is not part of the bio. This is just Hailey speaking. I have read many of these books. And some of them include Native, Living Resistance. And she has the first two installments of her new children's series. The first one called Winter's Gift and Summer's Magic, which I would really encourage you all to check out. Home, sweet home. Kaitlin, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much.
So Kaitlin and I met at a retreat for, I don't even know how you would describe it, young Richard Rohr fans or something.
Yes, that's accurate.
Many, 5, 6 so years ago. So for those that aren't familiar with Richard Rohr, which I'm sure many of our listeners are, but he's kind of he is a Franciscan priest. He's written a lot and done a lot of teachings and writings around kind of mystical and Christianity, contemplative Christianity, breaking down kind of dualism. And so I'm curious, Kaitlin, how did you, maybe even starting a little bit further back, maybe what is sort of the spiritual landscape that you came from, and then how did you end up at some, like a Richard Rohr retreat, which is considered a little rebellious, maybe from a more conservative kind of point of view?
Yes. So my sort of, faith upbringing was predominantly like Southern Baptist. But, when I was younger, so I'm Potawatomi, I'm from the Potawatomi Nation. And so, I had both of my grandmas were, Southern Baptist secretaries at their churches in Oklahoma. And so it was always sort of the background of a culture in our family, but also I didn't feel like when I was super young, that it was really strictly a part of our, I also was just a little kid, but it was enough of our family that I got quote unquote saved when I was, oh my gosh, I think I was 7 or 9. 7. I think I was 7. And got baptized on Easter Sunday because that was so important to me. Yes. So sacred.
How holy of you.
So it was just, yeah. So, just that was the main backdrop. And then when I was around 9 years old, my parents got divorced. And a few years later, my mom remarried, and my stepdad was a Southern Baptist pastor in Missouri, in this little town I grew up in. And so, so I naturally, when that becomes even more of a part of your life, that's what you're going to give your all to, and I was now like a pastor's kid. So my identity in so many ways was wrapped up in the Southern Baptist Church of the 2000s, which was like the purity movement and, lots of missions trips. And I will say, as I often say, because I think this is important, that, looking back on my life, the church truly was a very safe place for me. I had people who loved me well, but the institution, the things we believed about God, about other people, was wrong and colonial and racist and white supremacist, and check all the boxes, right, of those problems. But I was loved, and I did have community. And I think that that's the tension that many of us hold, and it's okay to hold that. Many of us don't hold that. There was other severe trauma, but I did have people who loved me well and had really wonderful friends and community. But in my late high school years, I found a church that was more like a charismatic, non-denominational, which felt so radical to me. So then I would go to my Baptist church and lead worship and stuff. And then I would go to this other church and feel all radical. And then a few years after that into college and into, I had, kids young. I got married really young. And I stumbled upon Richard's writing just through buying a book somewhere, I think. And I had never heard of any of this. I mean, let alone I didn't know what Advent was. I didn't know what Lent was. Certainly had never heard of the Desert Fathers and Mothers. Never heard of Richard Rohr. And so for me, trying to also understand the assimilation of my own Potawatomi identity growing up and how, as it happens for many of us in different ways, when you're in certain aspects of cultural Christianity, that you can feel like you have to hide parts of yourself or give up parts of yourself to remain good enough, right? And so a lot of my aspects of myself and my identity as a Potawatomi woman, I think were diminished in that space, right? And so wanting to choose that again and wanting to pay attention to that and celebrate that, right? And have that, for me, stumbling upon Richard's writing was so good for me because, of course, Richard really loves Indigenous culture. That's important to him. And I know that, even just knowing him, I know that. But also this expansiveness for me was very important. Being able to go from God as patriarchal white guy, Zeus kind of guy, to mystery, this expansive. For me, for some people that is very scary, but for me it was actually more comforting in a way to be oh, this God or whatever I've thought of could just be this mystery, this sacredness that just holds me somehow. And so actually unlabeling things really helped me begin to progress into a different form of my faith. And and so I found, I think just throwing his books. So then I enrolled in one of the courses, through the CAC. I think I just took the Franciscan theology one just to try to understand it. And at the same time, I stumbled upon Barbara Brown Taylor and Thomas Merton. So it was just this and at that time I was also writing my first book, Glory Happening. And so it was just these I think in my book I write about these doors just sort of busting open, and I'm just all these doors within me are just opening, and I'm finding different aspects of spirituality and faith and language that I had never had before. And so Richard was a big part of that, and I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah, same. I think I talk about, or yes, for those that are conversation partners with me or have to hear me process all these things over and over again, I always call Richard Rohr the gateway drug, kind of out of evangelicalism, because he has this beautiful, he is somewhat cerebral, he communicates in a very head-centered way. I don't know if he would agree with that, but that's how I experience his writing, and it really hits the Bible verse for everything kind of conditioning of my evangelical upbringing, but it ushers you into a more expansive view of scripture, a more expansive view of God, of, creator, of creation. And so I'm forever grateful for that kind of bridge. I feel like he's this beautiful bridge. And it's funny because I think he even himself is surprised by how much he's taken fire in evangelical world. He's I'm Catholic, what's up with this? But I'm there is something just about the way that he communicates. But you said something earlier that really struck me. Just that naming of coming, having these church spaces that were meaningful and that you experienced a lot of love, and a lot of awareness. I don't know. These are my words, not yours. So of course, push back if it doesn't resonate. But it was but it sounds like the love was a little bit conditional on playing the part of this really specific this really specific flavor of kind of Christianity, and kind of hiding or cutting off these parts that maybe wouldn't fit within that mold. And then you talk about these doors being flung open as you're sort of being exposed to this new theology, this more expansive, mysterious view of God. And I'm just kind of curious, how did you negotiate the liberation, like sort of this like liberation and what sounds like movement towards, again, this expansiveness, with sort of this awareness that it could come at the cost of belonging?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it helped that we were already had moved away from home. We're far, even physically, we're far removed from those circles. Really did help us. I share with people about my, what do I call it? Like a bubble of expansion, I guess is what I'll call it. So in the Southern Baptist Church and what I grew up in, our bubble is pretty tight and is pretty small around us as a collective. And anyone outside that bubble is very scary, and you need to be very careful, and you need to watch out for them or try to save them and bring them into the bubble, and it was like every time we moved to a new city, or we met new people, my bubble would start expanding. And at first I think that was scary because I wanted it, but I also was taught not to go there and not to ask these questions and not to let the bubble expand unless it's for, a good reason, or if it fits with that mold of why it should be expanding. And so when I did my social work program in college, my bubble was expanding. When my best friend was an atheist, my bubble was expanding. And I think it happened slowly. For me, it happened slowly without me realizing it. But now when I look back, I'm like, oh, that moment, my bubble was expanding. This moment, my bubble was expanding. And for me, that's just a really beautiful metaphor, because we still have kind of a circle of influence around us always, because we're human. But we can choose, or it happens without us even noticing. This bubble keeps expanding. And I think that is what the sort of monastic worldview, the contemplative worldview did for me, because I am a contemplative, but growing up, I always felt so guilty because I wasn't praying the right way. I wasn't writing in my prayer journal enough every day. It was constant guilt, even though my inner world was so rich, but it didn't look the way it was supposed to look for this particular way of being Christian. And so I always felt ashamed and guilty for not being a good enough prayer, or a good enough Christian, or a good enough whatever, daughter of the king, like whatever, all the metaphors, all the things we had, right?
Yeah.
And so it was just so freeing. But yes, I think when I chose to be a writer, I knew that was a decision I was making, that there were some things that were going to be changing in my world, that I was going to be sort of speaking up against some of those things. And finally, it was like I was choosing to be Potawatomi. I was choosing that. I've always been Potawatomi, but there are times when we have the choice, like it's like sort of a switch that we can choose to flip on. And I think that for me, I had done enough of the other things. I had done enough of the aspects of Christianity or other identity markers. And I wanted to be my full self. I wanted to integrate all of who I am. And that meant finally getting to just celebrate who I am as a Potawatomi person, and learning more about my culture and our people and our language, and doing that for my kids. And all of that comes at a cost. But it was so freeing at the same time, and completely worth it, and still a really difficult journey, when I wrote my book Native in 2020, a lot of it is about negotiating those spaces. I think I write in one section, like, the church wants what is white in me, but not what is Native in me. And I think for a lot of people, put whatever two, labels in there. The church wants this, but not this part of me. The church wants me to be like this, but not to be like this. And I think so many people have had to negotiate that. And that's not fair. It's not love. It's not, belonging. And so many people reached out to me after I wrote Native just to express that. And I'm so grateful because it made me feel less alone, choosing that is really hard, but it's so beautiful, and we're not alone. And a lot of people are figuring that out and doing that now.
I think, as a fellow, do you identify as mixed? I don't know how, you describe your identities.
I say mixed, yeah.
Okay. Whether, you're mixed or, we all have these, I think what you were alluding to earlier, whether it's your white part or your native part, or, or it's your extroverted part, but not your introverted part, it's it's all of these things that are there. There's such a almost like a very homogenous image of kind of what this good church going person is. And I have my own answer to this, but I'm kind of curious. It sounds like with your bubble analogy, maybe it was just slowly, but you earlier said it's not loving to do that. It's not loving to kind of accept only part of someone. Mm-hmm. I would even take that a step further and say it's pretty violent to not accept all of someone. And I would often use the analogy of I feel like I had to cut off parts of my body, and it feels that visceral. And so I feel like I have these memories of kind of really being okay, I'm not going to allow that violence to happen to me anymore. But I'm curious, was there moments or a moment of being okay, this is more than I'm willing to compromise? Or has it, again, just been sort of a gradual divestment from that way of being in faith community?
I think it was gradual up to a point, and then probably around as I was writing Native. So probably in 2019, 2020, 2016 was Standing Rock and Trump's election, and I was writing for Sojourners at the time. So I was in this incredible world of seeing so much come to light about America, about Indigenous people, about the church. And so that was getting me through to, I think, these breakthroughs of honoring who I am and honoring these stories, and paying attention to what resistance is and what activism is and what care is and all these things. So coming awake to that, building new community, right? That's so much more expansive than what I grew up with. And so I think probably writing Native, it was finally those moments where I was allowing myself to feel angry and to not just be okay with it, because I grew up people pleaser, trying not to rock the boat, trying not to. And so that even when I first started writing was a real struggle for me of trying to hold all of that. And now I've come to know myself better and to be okay with these two adjectives that I describe myself as is fierce and tender or gentle. And so I want to be a fierce truth teller. I want to tell the truth, but I'm also a storyteller and a poet. And I want to do it in an invitational way. I want to bring people with me, not shame them into being frozen and not wanting to do anything. And so being fierce and gentle or fierce and tender, that is me. And, but that doesn't mean either that I have to compromise anymore. And so, but it also meant we left institutional church spaces in 2019, I think. I've been a church leader since I was 10, so it was which also is a somewhat abusive thing, I think, to put so much on young people, very young people. But anyway, that's just part of it, part of the culture as well. But yeah, I think I finally needed to not be a part of it anymore and to not be a church. I'm a faith leader in my writing and in my work, but not at a local institutional level. I'm not part of a denomination anymore. And for me, I needed that. I had to step out and sort of free myself from that to keep figuring out who I am and what I want to say and who I want to be in the bigger world of spirituality or Christianity or whatever it is.
Yeah. That's beautiful. And I really appreciate that you sharing that journey. And what I'm hearing is that there is just sort of a continual leaning into like that open door sensation, and that alignment that has just sort of like lit the path that you've taken. Not necessarily like, okay, this is the path and here I'm going. It's just kind of like, as I continue to like explore and experience spirit in these new and expansive ways, I'm just going to keep following that and trust the path that it's guiding me on.
Yeah, very much so.
I think that's really important on so many levels, and one of them being that I think I always say like, I don't care if people stay Christian. I primarily work with folks that grew up in the Christian tradition in my spiritual direction practice, but I'm always like, I don't care if you're a Christian or if you stay a Christian, but if you leave Christianity because you can't like imagine a better expression of it than sort of the institutionalized version of it, I think that makes me a little bit sad when we can't sort of differentiate the institutionalized power from like the wisdom tradition.
Right.
Which again, at the end of the day, if it doesn't resonate, it doesn't resonate. But so often when we experience harm within, faith or within like religious spaces, we tend to almost define ourselves by what we're not. I'm not that, I'm not that, I'm not that. And have less fluency around like what we are. And it just is really, at least I'm hearing in what you're saying, just this real beautiful leaning into what I am. There's a little, and integrating some of that parts that were there before that might not be who you are now, but it's still kind of a part of you. I don't know. There's not even really a question there.
No, but that's right. And I started the Liminality Journal, which is my Substack, in maybe 2021 or something. And liminality is exactly that. It's when we grow up in spaces that are so heavy on labels, like it's very important to know what your denomination is. It's very important to be able to name these things, or, to be able to share your testimony, or to be able to, name the 10 traits you want in a future spouse, or like whatever these things are, but they're very specific things that we have to hold, and we have to be able to say them when we need to say them. We have to kind of have those labels like locked down. And so when we leave those spaces, I think a lot of us get really scared. It's freeing to not have all those labels, but it's also scary for people. And I find that liminal space is such a beautiful way to hold that, and to just say, it's okay. It's okay if you don't want to call yourself a Christian right now, but you don't know what to call yourself. You don't want to be labeled post-evangelical, but you don't really know what you do want to be labeled. Like, that is okay. And you can take your time to figure out what your new labels are. And if we don't abuse labels, they can be so beautiful. And so that's hard, right? But like fierce and gentle are my labels. And that's kind of right now, that's my spiritual label even, I think. And I have to be okay with that. Now, when I am preaching at churches or at Christian conferences, which is so much of my work still, I know I make people uncomfortable, and they are kind of like, but where do you fit? Or, what's your, what box do I put you in? And I don't have one for them. And that's okay with me. I'm totally fine with it. They may not be, but I am. And so we have to be okay with the liminal space. I mean, it's there. It's always there. But how are we sort of embracing it and paying attention to it? Which also brings us to Richard and that vein of wisdom, right? But that vein of wisdom has been around for a very long time in cultures all over the world. And that's the beauty, is, again, that opening doors or the bubble expanding, is these deep wells of wisdom are all over the place, which is probably why I love being a storyteller and a writer so much, because I get to just feed on these wells of wisdom from others, and it's so beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. I know. Well, as soon as you said the fierce and tender, wait, is that fierce and yeah? I immediately had the image of the yin yang, come to mind.
Yeah.
That we need the yin and the yang, the we need those energies in balance with each other.
Right.
So yeah, and I know for myself, as I've allowed myself to, I'm grateful to have grown up, I'm grateful to have grown up with access to kind of my family that's Buddhist, and learn a little about Shintoism like as a kid, but I've leaned a lot more into that kind of as my bubble has expanded, and it's always so what's like almost comforting is the word that comes to mind when you come across these teachings or rituals or things within like your ancestral tradition that you just deeply resonate with, or that you kind of knew but didn't have the words for, and it helps you locate yourself a little bit or something. And I'm curious how your journey into expanding your relationship with your native identity and digging back into these things that had been kind of cut off. I don't know, what's that journey been like for you spiritually?
Oh, it's been incredible. And what you were saying, like, so comforting. Like, the first time I heard a prayer in Potawatomi, where I was thinking like, oh my God, I've only ever prayed in English. Like that's a colonizing language, like I didn't know I could pray in Potawatomi, and I think it's such a complex thing, because we have to honor the ways in which assimilation is so connected to trauma and the silencing of so many of our ancestors, so many of my Potawatomi ancestors, that your survival is based on assimilation, or on your trauma is coming out of all of that in a colonial context where you're told you're not good enough, where you're told you shouldn't even be alive, where you're moved to a new homeland and told to just survive there. There's so many things that my family has carried. And so for me to start learning bits of our language, or to start learning our stories and to share them with my kids, it is so comforting and so powerful, because as many of us have found out, that our ancestral languages hold our cultures. And so, you learn a story or you learn a certain word, and you get to unpack that word and the depth of it and the beauty of it. Like our idea of the Milky Way is like our spirit path. It's the journey after death that we go on. Like, how beautiful for me to know that it's not just Dante's Inferno or some heaven thing place somewhere up above, but there's other ways to even understand life and death and our spirits and our bodies. And I can't even explain how important that's been to me, and meeting people from other cultures and or other people who are trying to connect to their ancestral ways, and how much solidarity we have and kinship we have for each other, because what a gift that is, like, for me to hear that you're doing that, and for you to hear that I'm doing that. And that's so beautiful. And that gives me so much hope in so many of these spaces, that so many of us are honoring those parts of ourselves and going against the status quo and doing so. And that's so beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. It really is beautiful. And it is comforting to know that, you're not alone on the journey. I remember having this like really visceral trying to think of how to make this story not super long, but I kind of walked with one of my grandmothers, to her transition into becoming an ancestor last year. And so there's all kinds of questions, as we sat like on her bed together that I realized I didn't know and I wanted to ask her. And one was how she became a Christian. And because I was like, I knew she grew up Buddhist, and then I knew my dad grew up Christian, and I didn't really know the story in between. And, the long story short is after the Japanese internments, and they came back to Eastern Washington where they had a farm. And because all the Japanese people had left, the Buddhist temple had left, and all that was left was a Methodist church. And her parents, there are 8 kids, they just wanted them out of the house on Sundays. So they sent them to Methodist Sunday school, and that was that, Yeah. And I was like, I just always assumed there was some conversion story. Jesus came down from the sky and, it's like, no, it was because of this, unjust incarceration of my family that then changed the entire trajectory of like my spiritual formation as a human. And I felt this sadness and grief, and then also this just voice kind of telling me, like, when you talk about the trauma of assimilation, I don't want to like gloss over that or I don't know anything, but I had this experience of like, we lay these like we assimilated to survive, because that's what assimilation often is a survival technique. So like we assimilated to survive so that you can pick this back up. Like it doesn't die with us. It had to lay dormant so that we could survive again. And then we knew that you would pick it back up and bring it, continue the lineage, like we have that opportunity and invitation, even though it can feel overwhelming or daunting. If you weren't raised in something, it can almost feel like, oh, I don't deserve this because I didn't grow up doing this. It's like, but it's in you. And there is, it's hard, but it's also, there's something so sacred in that picking back up of those traditions.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful way of putting it, that it's like it's laying dormant, waiting to be tended to again, and it makes me think of like our, we have these different prophecies, and we're in the 7th fire right now, which is this time in the Anishinaabe world, like our time to sort of where young people get to choose who we are. Like we get to choose now. Do we keep our stories going? Do we pick them back up again? Or do we stick with the colonial ways and just kind of keep going? Like we're in this pivotal moment. I think you can feel that all over the world, that we're feeling so many different ways of these uprisings, of these, that even the chaos, like that we're recognizing things aren't as they should be. And the beauty of so many people in so many ways trying to choose that sacredness and choose their ancestral ways and choose Mother Earth and choose, to fight against extraction and colonialism and all of these things that have sort of haunted us for so long. And I think that's so beautiful and very hard, but really beautiful. Yeah.
It is really beautiful. I sometimes I get a little bit, well, actually don't totally wish I was like a teenager right now. I don't necessarily want to go back to being a teenager, but sometimes I feel there's so much more like language and modeling of a different way for young people now than for me when I was young, in the context that I was in, which was very, Christian, very kind of isolated. And I'm so interested and excited to see what emerges. I'm not letting myself off the hook. I know I'm not an elder yet and I still have my own work to do, but I am so excited and interested to see what how these younger generations integrate. It's just, they feel a little bit more integrated to me because of the spectrum of identities that are named and available. which is so beautiful. This is a little bit going back in the conversation, and it's okay if you don't have like an opinion on this, but it kind of came to mind, so I wanted to ask. Because, you know, you and I are talking about kind of excavating and tapping back into and expanding and exploring and integrated basically the non-white parts of our spiritual kind of traditions. And yet I think it's possible and important for white-bodied people to know that they have ancestral practices too. Because also, I mean, whatever, maybe I shouldn't say this, but I'm like, a lot of white people like love native traditions. A lot of white people like love Buddhism, you know, and it's like, whatever, whatever. But that white people can also tap, like, that there are ancestral practices, pre-colonial practices, you know, of white-bodied people too, and that are beautiful and interesting and sacred. And I don't know, I'm just curious, as a Native person, how it is, if that's something you encourage people towards, or how, if you ever support non-Native folks in kind of re-indigenizing their spiritualities.
I mean, I think if there are non-exploitive ways to do that, and ways that happen in community and connection and kinship, I think that that's so important. I've been reading and studying for my new book. I've been reading about, you know, the witch hunts from around the world, but they happened in Europe and then happened in the United States. And, you know, so many of it was women who were othered in some way, and so many of them were medicine people. So many of them were earth-based practitioners, and or they were just women who were gaining too much power, or they're women who were just didn't fit with society in whatever way, and just the constant othering. But studying that has brought so much to my attention of those ancestral practices that, again, so much of the power in the church weeded out and forced out and killed to get rid of, and how important it is, that reclamation. And so, I think it's really important. And being mixed, like I know that I have to pay attention to that, you know, paying attention to my Irish ancestry and my Scottish ancestry, you know, like, what does that mean for me? And again, doing it in a way that embraces and holds it, and not in a way that is empty or that exploits. And I think that's then also the Potawatomi side of me speaking, and that we have to be careful the way we do things. You know, like I write about ethical resistance, like it's not just that we're resisting or that we're leaning into these questions, but how are we doing it? Are we doing it in a way that is safe for others? Are we doing it in a way that doesn't take advantage of or commodify? And I think that that's always at the front of my mind is, yes, let's keep connecting and figuring these out, but let's make sure we're doing it in a way that is rooted in kinship and in the power of storytelling. So that's kind of where my thoughts are.
I think because my Japanese side was so otherized, like growing up, that it's like trying to, you know, there's been this necessary reconnecting with that part, but then I don't want it to oversize, you know, like, and so there's been some fun exploration of, you know, of Celtic traditions, of pagan traditions. So far, it hasn't really gone anything beyond reading books, but it feels important to, I think it's harder because that stuff is so much further back, and there's no one alive that can tell me what my family did or didn't do necessarily, unlike my Japanese side. But I think it's Adrienne Maree Brown who said something like, it's really sad that we can more readily imagine the end of the world than we can the end of capitalism. And I think that just speaks to how like limited our view of what's possible is. Like that vision, and vision is so necessary for rebuilding, because again, it's not just what are you against, but what are you for. And there's something about being able to reach back like over all the colonization. Not that it wasn't violent, not that their society didn't have its own, it's a violent time back then. I'm not saying that that's ideal, but to be able to know there was a time before capitalism and there can be a time after, there's something about that expansiveness through time that feels really important to me personally, as I consider how am I rebuilding like my spirituality and my my, I don't know. Yeah. Just rebuilding.
Well, yeah. And that's why I do so many workshops and stuff on, helping us connect to ourselves, each other, and Mother Earth, because it is all connected. It is not disconnected at all, but we don't always recognize that. And every human being needs to heal our relationship to Mother Earth. Like all of us do. And when we begin that journey, it should lead us toward how can I practice land-based practices? How can I acknowledge the sacredness of water or the creatures around me? I mean, it should naturally lead us toward something that connects us to some part of who we are, who our ancestors were along the way, because so many places, cultures around the world, historically held the sacredness of the earth and throughout time, and our stories held that, and we can look to the evidence of that throughout history, but we've lost it, and it's been taken from us, and our bodies have been removed from our lands. So much of that, right? And so when I encourage people, like, I want you to start writing love letters to Mother Earth, and I want you to explore this relationship as if it's a real relationship, because it is a real one. And how are we going to fight for the climate and fight for our existence and fight for the earth if there's no, if we don't acknowledge this is a relationship we have with our literal bodies, with our stories, with our histories that connect back to the land and the earth. And so that, I feel, is part of my work, is through poetry, through stories, through writing, through embodiment, that we begin to heal our connection to the world, and that will help us heal our relationship to our own bodies and our own story, and it will help us heal our relationship to each other. And like you were saying, will help us cast a vision, will help us explore what world we want in the future and what world we want for future generations. And it's so spiritual. It's like almost so spiritual I don't even have words for how spiritual it is. It's like it lives in our bodies in ways we can't name always. It's just there. Like, it's just, this is who we are as human beings. We are made for this. And I want us to hold that together.
This podcast exists so that people, like, this episode exists so that people can hear that. And like, that's all. That's it. That is so good. And as you were saying that you feel like you exist to help people connect to self, connect to others, connect to earth. And that is how we tap into these ancestral traditions and the streams, the ever flowing stream of life and spirituality that we're all a part of. That brings me so much excitement and hope, because even the way I framed it of reaching back so we can reach forward is ignoring the present. And I'm hearing you say that being present to self, being present to community relationships, being present to Mother Earth, like, that's almost, okay, I apologize for maybe how existential this might sound, but I'm like, that's like a time machine almost. Like that is like,
Mm-hmm.
that's a moment. The present moment is like all moments in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the
Absolutely.
portal. That's the portal to everything that's been and everything that will be.
Yes.
And
mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I picture
profound.
like that we're in a loop. So like if life is a long horizontal oval like this, our ancestors are at one end and future generations are at another. And again, we're in the liminal space. We're in the in between, and all the healing, all the care, everything we do today is healing. I believe is healing our ancestors, is helping to heal them, helping to heal what they couldn't get to or what was hard for them. And it's healing us, obviously, and it's giving something to future generations, which somehow for me like makes the work more important, but also like sort of takes the weight off of my shoulders in a way, because I know the loop will just keep repeating. And so I get to sort of be in the center of that, holding this with them, I guess. And I don't want healing to just be for me only. Like I want it to be a time machine. I want it to be able to exist in all realms somehow. And that's such a fun, magical way to think about our existence, right? It's so beautiful.
Yeah, it is really beautiful. That interconnectedness, that sense of belonging that comes when we don't think that we live in isolation from those that came before us and those that came after us, but that we are in continual relationship, and that we are contributing to the healing of our ancestors and our descendants, just as they'll contribute to our healing once we are occupying a different plane of existence. I can't think of a better way to end this conversation, but inviting people to sit with that image, even to notice if they can locate themselves in that oval or whatever image comes to their mind when they kind of think of that circular relationship with with those that have come before, those that'll come after, with their connection to each other, connection to self, connection to earth. There's just a lot to work with there. Yeah. Thank you so much for bringing all of that wisdom. I feel like changed on a cellular level after this conversation. So
we need a nap. We're going to go take naps. See you guys later.
I need a journal. I need a nap. I need to take a walk. I got a lot I got to process. But for those that want to stay, connected to you, I mean, I hear you have a Substack. I hear you're working on a new book. That's so exciting. How can people find you, connect with you, interact with your work?
I mean, if you go to my website, KaitlinCurtice.com, that's sort of the hub of everything. But, I'm on Instagram a lot, for better or for worse. I travel a lot. I do a lot of online workshops and just spaces to hold, with each other. I do writing spaces with my paid Substack subscribers. So if you want to support me on Substack and become a paid subscriber, there's some fun meetings we do. And Substack is really where my non-book writing, where a lot of my heart is. I do a lot of series on things, on connecting to the earth, on just care. And I think that's the three main ways you can find me. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you for joining for this conversation. Thank you for the ways that you are healing yourself and healing your lineage, those in your lineage, and healing our world. I'm so grateful for it. Thanks, Kaitlin.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Embodied Spirituality Podcast. I would love to invite you to like, subscribe, rate, leave a comment wherever it is that you listen to this podcast, whatever platform is your preferred platform. It does go a long way in ensuring the sustainability of this show. Also, if you want to learn more about my work as a somatic coach or a spiritual director, you can go to HaileyMitsui.com. That's HaileyMitsui.com and learn more about my work, my programming, and how we might be able to partner together in the future. Thanks, and I'll see you soon.